The solution for all of these things is to say that people have the right to live in dignity and in peace in their homes, and that nobody should be stopped from going back to what is their home, fundamentally. Whether they're Arabs or Jews or Palestinians or Israelis, people have a right to live at peace in their homes. That's why I think creating one democratic and secular state would do that in the case of Palestine and Israel. And of course, as I said, I think Arab Jews should have absolutely the right to go back to their homes in Arab countries if that's what they want to do, no question.
I very much enjoyed how literary your analysis was, and I wondered I think you're a professor of literature, is that right? I wondered what you thought about, given that the Nakba produced such an extraordinary body of Palestinian writers and poets, I wondered what you thought literature's possibilities were in the peace process.
I mean, I think, yeah, there's some. I mean, that's a huge question. I can't really do the question justice in the 30 seconds I have to answer it. Let me just give one quick example that people can look at. Then I think it's worth looking at. The great Palestinian novelist Ghassan Kanafani, before he was assassinated by the Israelis, wrote a story called "Return to Haifa," and in this story, it's about the story. I won't reveal what happens, but basically it's about the story of a Palestinian family that goes back to their home in Haifa to find out what happened to it, and they find living in their home, obviously, a Jewish family that had taken a home over in 1948. And it's about the encounter, it's a long story, but essentially it's about the encounter of a Palestinian narrative of wanting to return to the home from which these Palestinians were dispossessed. And then they meet these Jewish people there, and we get the whole Jewish narrative of the Holocaust and what happened to them and so forth. And the story doesn't resolve this clash of the two narratives. It presents them both. But I think it's astonishing to think in retrospect that the greatest revolutionary Palestinian novelist in the 1960s was giving us a narrative, a very sympathetic narrative, presented from a Jewish Israeli perspective of what it's like, what happened to Jews in Europe, for example, why these guys are in their house in Haifa after all. It's not just because they're monsters, it's because they were removed and suffered incredibly in Europe and so forth. And yet he's Palestine's most revolutionary novelist. So I think it's incredible the way in which literature does have a capacity to help people think through these things. The remarkable thing is that, as I said, Ghassan Kanafani was killed by the Israelis in a car bomb. So that's also worth pondering. Why would they want to kill a man like that?
You spoke about the Museum of Tolerance locating a particular great universal ideal, specifically in relation to one people and their experience, and that was at the symbolic level. And at the same time, at the physical level, the museum transforms the wall into something else, something that doesn't exist for those who do not wish it to be a symbol of oppression for others. And I'm just wondering from there if you could comment on the way that perhaps do you see a connection between the proliferation of Holocaust museums across many parts of the world, particularly in the United States, which has always seemed to me to be puzzling, because I can understand Holocaust museums existing in Europe, but I find it, while I don't mind, I have no objection to people setting them up, but elsewhere, but it's always seemed to be puzzling to me that they're set up in countries in which people were not taken away to camps, but other people, like the American Indians, for example, had a terrible experience at the hands of colonial settlers. I say this, of course, with in my background, is the fact that my grandparents on my father's side perished in the Holocaust. But I think that for me, it seems that the Holocaust museums have proliferated so that the memory of one particular thing is brought to the foreground in the public mind, to the exclusion of all others.
Well, that's a very, very profound question, and I honestly can't do it justice, but maybe we can talk afterwards, because it really is it's a massive and very important question. I mean, just quickly, I'll just say that the most amazing version of that is in fact this museum itself, the one I was talking about, because here it is with a chance to, even if it's built in a cemetery, to talk about reconciliation and all those things that it says it wants to talk about, human dignity and recognizing the other and this stuff. But in fact, what it does is it in effect, it wants to rehash yet again. Not the Holocaust. It's actually not about. I don't really. It doesn't even talk about the Holocaust, this museum, because there's Yad Vashem just nearby. But it's as I said, it's an attempt to reconstruct the complexity of European Jewish history in this sort of monolinear way. But the depth of your question about the proliferation of Holocaust museums around the world, I think there should be Holocaust museums. There's no question. The question is, why is it that act of monstrosity and suffering and trauma and so forth does sometimes seem to eclipse others, and especially in places like the U.S., but more than the U.S. in this case, in Jerusalem as well. I don't know. That's something that I think, I don't have an answer to the question, unfortunately, not off the top of my head, but I think it's something that we should all think about, because I think all acts of suffering are abominable, and that nobody should suffer like what Jews went through, or gypsies, or whoever in the Holocaust, or what people in Iraq are going through now, or Africans in the period of slavery in the Atlantic and so forth. I think what we really could have used, in fact, is a museum that is genuinely devoted to the question of tolerance, that tries to bring all of these historical moments of trauma and suffering and loss, etc., and relate them to each other rather than separate them from each other in this kind of vertical kind of way.
I think you have time for one more very quick question.
Thank you for letting me sneak in. Thank you, Sari, for your lyrical and thoughtful meditation and alerting us to this museum of intolerance, an ultimate edifice into what museums really are about in terms of their problematic histories, in terms of vehicles for colonial settlerism. Indigenous people on this land are still trying to reclaim their human remains from the museums of who used to be the colonial masters of this land. Without going into sort of complex elaborations, and also reflecting the kind of conversations we have with each other as cultural producers, as writers, as activists. How do we create politics and poetics of Palestine in public spaces, given that you reflect the idea that Zionism has been rewritten as a universal kind of value? I myself, as well as others in this room, have worked on our own local level for many years, and 6 years ago this week, a state cultural institution in this city was doing very dirty work in denying the story of Palestine in corrupt episodes of censorship, which they went on to deny publicly in the media. So your language of the denial of denial is very beautiful in reflecting on how cultural institutions in this city do the same job that you are describing. So I want you to talk about creating in public spaces the story of Palestine.
Thank you. Again, that's also, all these questions are they're much too profound because I don't have the capacity to talk about, to do them justice. I'm sorry about that. But it seems to me that what Palestinians can do is what you're doing and what I'm trying to do and what many people are trying to do, which is to tell the story. I think to represent ourselves. And it's true that sometimes the public fora are closed to Palestinians. Sometimes it's extraordinarily difficult to get a Palestinian point of view into a mainstream newspaper. But nevertheless, Palestinians need to persist in those acts of representation and have faith in the end that people around the world understand. Once they hear it, they fundamentally understand the Palestinian cause. Once people understand what the people of Palestine have been through and are going through right now, it's almost impossible to deny that level of suffering and for people to close their eyes to it. So then it really is a matter of being able to tell the story and to talk to audiences such as yourselves and others. So I think all we can do is just keep telling the story. And That by itself will, I think, help towards achieving a just peace, because bringing the narrative out from the underground where it's been buried for too long and bringing it to the light of day is an important feature of trying to achieve, in the genuine sense this time, balance in the world.
This is ABC Fora,